Good evening, I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Andrew is away. Finally, it is New Year's Eve, but COVID didn't get the note about fresh beginnings.
The virus is winning.
Hospitals in Ontario and Quebec are close to capacity and warning of overflow as the virus breaks records.
Every healthcare worker will tell you this is very real.
A dumb mistake.
Ontario's finance minister returns from vacation and then resigns from cabinet.
This is my question for At Issue.
At Issue takes your questions on the political year that was.
Did they rely on science or on a populist agenda?
Go get it, yeah. Go get it as fast as possible.
And the first vaccine administered in Canada's north, a much-needed shot of hope to close out 2020.
My grandsons will see me in the paper.
This is The National. So this is it, the end finally of 2020, a year full of fear and heartache that has become the world's collective enemy. The virus is still raging, the pain's still real, but getting to this point, the dawn of a new year, is a win, even if just psychologically or symbolically. And so today, around the world, people bid farewell to 2020 however they could and welcome the new year with hope. Fireworks still lit up Sydney's harbour, but this year the usual million revelers were asked to stay away.
Normally there's crowds of people out, and yeah, it's a bit eerie this evening.
All over, celebrations were smaller or just cancelled, like London's fireworks display. In Greece, France, and Turkey, there were early curfews. In India, some went to the beach to wave goodbye to 2020 as the sun set.
While we look at the sun going down, I think we can just hope for a better tomorrow, a nicer 21.
And in the city that's been in this the longest, Wuhan, China, this sight. Balloons released into the night sky, floating away with the year. But along with the wishes for better times to come, there is the reality of today. The fight against COVID-19 is getting harder here at home. As Jayla Bernstein explains, hospitals are under pressure and warning about what's ahead.
This is something that is new. It's never happened before.
This Montreal hospital is one of many struggling to keep up with COVID.
To look at all the beds in and around the city of Montreal and say, like, you know, there's no beds left, that is a first. And of course, this is something that we're working really hard not to get there.
Right now, nearly 2/3 of designated COVID beds in Montreal hospitals are occupied. So today, a warning from officials. Within the next 3 weeks, the need for beds could surpass hospital capacities.
There are capacities of adjustment, so we're not at that point, but certainly it's a signal of the importance of the burden of risk for the hospitals, namely.
Hospitals are working to make more room, but cases are climbing at an alarming rate. In the past week, someone in Canada died from COVID every 11 and a half minutes on average. As of today, there are more than 700 COVID patients in intensive care units. 165 are in Quebec, but 337 of them are in Ontario. That's the province's highest number yet. Today, Ontario also set a new record for hospitalizations, 1,235 people.
It has become a daily occurrence where we're having bed spacing issues, where there are critically ill patients in the hospital and in the emergency department, and we're having to figure out new ways to get them into the ICU.
Since the start of the pandemic, the great fear has been a repeat of those horrific scenes in Italy, where doctors had to choose which patients to save. It's a possibility doctors here are now preparing for.
Certainly we have thought about it. It's not something easy to think about or easy to do, but it may end up becoming necessary if things continue to get worse.
To avoid that outcome in 2021, doctors are pleading with people to stay home and avoid spreading the virus. Jayla Bernstein, CBC News, Montreal.
Canada's two biggest provinces broke multiple records at the tail end of 2020. This is the third straight day when new cases reached new peaks. In Quebec, more than 2,800 today. Ontario soared past 3,000. Here's Magda Gebrselassie with what else the next few weeks could bring to Ontario.
Should I tell you when?
Sheila Barber gets her shot.
Okay, when? When? She's the first at her long-term care home in Toronto to get the Moderna vaccine. This as Ontario COVID cases keep coming, causing concern for doctors.
We're all feeling that same pain, that same frustration, frankly, when we see this happen.
The toll that COVID-19 takes is deep and personal for all frontline workers, says Dr. Thasleem Nimji.
I can think of a patient just within the last 24 hours that was quite young and that unfortunately passed away. And these are people that have young children, right? Like these are people that really, should not be passing away.
Today, Ontario reported another 56 lives lost and more than 3,300 new cases, another daily record. This expert on COVID-19 data says Ontario took too long to enter lockdown.
If our lockdown here in Ontario is as effective as Alberta and also Manitoba, we should be able to bring our cases down to under 1,000 by the third week of January.
By then, Ontario's vaccine program, with its 2 vaccines, will be a month in. Criticized for its slow start, it has only administered about 27,000 doses of around 140,000 received.
We're not going to be able to vaccinate people fast enough to really change the course of this until far later in the spring.
He says things will get worse unless public health measures are strictly applied. With so many lives on the line, Dr. Nimji is trying to hang on to hope.
I'm hoping for more time with my children, frankly. I'm hoping for more time with those that I love as well. And I'm hoping for the patients that we serve to have to deal with less pain, with less illness.
And more time. Magda Gebrselassie, CBC News, Toronto.
Dr. Zain Chagla is an infectious disease physician. Dr. Chagla, I'm going to presume Canadian hospitals have never had a crisis like this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, this means the ability for us to actually provide care is being compromised. We have to scale up beds, which mean more staff, more equipment, more space, more risks to patients, and essentially much more strain on a healthcare system, which is trying to also provide help to long-term care, to their communities, and many other sectors, and really compromising patient care as things go forward.
So we have vaccines going in arms now, but then we have these rising infection rates. So what do the next 3 weeks likely look like for us?
So our vaccines aren't going to show effects for 3 to 6 months. And unfortunately, with the rising rates that are there now, we're going to see hospitalizations rise in 2 to 4 weeks and deaths rise in 2 to 4 weeks. It means we're going to have to make some difficult decisions about who gets prioritized for critical care, but as well, what services we need to close down. Things like elective surgeries, hips, cancer surgeries may get taken off the table for patients that have been waiting for them through the pandemic. And as much as we want to provide good care, this is just the reality of the situation.
Okay, terrifying. Dr. Chagla, thank you very much.
No problem.
A happy new year in the Northwest Territories today as the first doses of the Moderna vaccine were administered at a retirement home in Canada's north.
I thought we were going to be waiting much longer, and boom, up it came today. If everybody in the world gets one, we'll be good.
Bruce Jonasson was the first to receive the shot in Yellowknife. Caroline Douglas was the first elder to be vaccinated in Beshico. The government expects to vaccinate 75% of the population by March. The Moderna vaccine also arrived in Newfoundland and Labrador this afternoon. The shipment landed in Happy Valley Goose Bay and will be sent to Indigenous communities along the north coast. Another shipment is expected in a couple of weeks for a total of 2,400 doses. Ontario's former finance minister left the heat of St. Bart's to feel the political heat at home. But while Rod Phillips quarantines, Sarah Levitt tells us about a new revelation: an Alberta cabinet minister vacationing in Hawaii.
A dumb mistake.
Fresh off the plane back from St. Bart's this morning, Rod Phillips struck a remorseful tone.
I hope people appreciate I've disappointed no one more than myself.
Despite repeated calls from his government to avoid non-essential travel, Phillips spent the holidays in the Caribbean. This morning's mea culpa was missing one thing: his resignation. That came hours later. At a time when the people of Ontario have sacrificed so much, today's resignation is a demonstration that our government takes seriously our obligation to hold ourselves to a higher standard.
It really is a slap in the face of frontline health workers who risk their lives every single day. We've seen this lack of urgency around what this really is. It's a crisis. It's a healthcare crisis.
It's also not the first trip Phillips has taken this pandemic. He traveled to Switzerland in August.
I think this puts a stain on the entire government, not just Rod Phillips. And I think that that's something that people are going to have to judge.
Tonight, news of another high-profile elected official taking a holiday outside of Canada.
I wanted to wish you and yours a very Merry Christmas.
CBC has confirmed Alberta's Minister of Municipal Affairs, Tracy Allard, was in Hawaii. More than 1,000 Albertans have now died from COVID-19, 546 in the last month alone. Questioned about the trip, Allard's press secretary wouldn't give any dates, only saying she was now home. With cases rising in both Alberta and Ontario, Phillips and Allard are being taken to task for their trips. It's something that calls into question their province's pandemic responses heading into 2021. Sarah Levitt, CBC News, Toronto.
Whether flying home from hot or cold places, starting 1 week from tonight, passengers will need to test negative for COVID before boarding a flight to Canada. But airlines say a week is not enough time to get ready. Ashley Burke on the latest turbulence between the industry and the government.
Carol Cummings is trying to get a hold of her friends in Barbados for answers, where to get a COVID test during her trip this month to what she calls her second home.
It's kind of like going to the cottage here, but it's just a farther trip.
Cummings has traveled to Barbados almost every year since the 70s. She feels it's safe there and isn't letting COVID-19 or these new requirements stop her from going this year too.
Myself, my friends, my family, we've all been good here. We've followed the rules. We've quarantined. We haven't got together. So I think we can do that in another country, especially one who's taking care of their people too.
But the Minister of Transport disagreed.
She may feel that she's not taking additional risk, but she is exposing Canadians to additional risk.
Marc Arnault stressed today non-essential travel is not recommended and announced new requirements that come into effect in a week that could deter other travelers. Anyone 5 or older will have to show proof of a negative COVID test taken within 72 hours before boarding a flight home to Canada.
If they haven't got the test result and there are clinics available, they will have to reschedule their departure because they won't be allowed on board.
But if travelers can show there was nowhere to get a test abroad, they can still fly home. But new rules require them to quarantine in Canada at a federally regulated facility.
To roll it out properly, a week is not enough time.
Frustrated airlines have been pushing the federal government for 6 months to start testing at airports in Canada, and said they weren't consulted about the new requirements, nor did they get the details they need during talks today.
That time frame is not going to be sufficient to do this properly, and I think you're going to see a great deal of confusion.
Confusion for airlines and passengers, some now scrambling to find places to get tested abroad. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
Some news today for hockey fans. Alberta became the first province to say the NHL can play games in its arenas. The decision comes after the federal government agreed to waive the 14-day quarantine period for players and staff returning to Canada on what the government calls national interest grounds. Canadian teams will compete in the newly formed North Division, in which games will be played only in Canada. But the league still needs permission from 4 other provinces with NHL clubs before the season starts in exactly 2 weeks. With 2021 starting tonight, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau sent a message to Canadians.
Today, as we look towards a new year full of possibilities and optimism, we also have to reflect on the year we just had and what a year it has been.
Trudeau spoke about the profound impact of COVID-19 on the lives of all Canadians. He thanked frontline workers for their sacrifices through a very tough year. And as this tough year draws to a close, many Canadians have been finding some ways to celebrate from a distance, some even managing a bit of optimism along the way. Greg Rasmussen shows us how.
It was a long wait at BC's liquor stores, the impact of a last-minute decision to cut off alcohol sales at 8 p.m. on the last night of a difficult year.
Definitely a very different New Year's than last New Year's, but I think we can survive.
Ushering in 2021 and turning the page, writing a new chapter.
A hoped-for pop-in sales has gone flat for bars and restaurants, also told to cut off the flow at 8 p.m. The biggest complaint, that the province waited until yesterday to change the rules, upsetting weeks of planning.
It was a blow to all of us, to all of our staff, to all of our guests, and to all of us as operators who've really been trying to create a safe place for people to be able to come and celebrate.
Where you live in Canada will dictate how you can celebrate. In Newfoundland, no dancing allowed at this bar, but the taps can still flow.
And at 12 o'clock, the place erupts and everyone's going around hugging and kissing each other. And obviously, we can't be doing that this year. So it's going to be, it's going to be different.
In Montreal, after a year of struggles, hopes for a few extra dollars in the till at the end of the night.
We expect to be pretty busy. We already have a lot of pre-orders, and I mean, it's the last day of the year, so.
And in Toronto, a favorite cover band won't be able to pack the house. Instead of a live show, they're streaming a performance from their studio.
We have a New Year's tradition that's been going for about 10 years now, and so this is a different one.
Also on the shelf for this New Year's in many locations, fireworks and other outdoor gatherings. Many have decided, just keep it simple.
We're gonna stay in with our family then. Just grab a cup of wine.
I'm just happy to see this year done. Take care. Happy New Year.
Many glad to say goodbye to 2020 with hopes for better days ahead. Greg Rasmussen, CBC News, Vancouver.
So as we prepare for those unusual countdowns across the country tonight, we decided to take a moment to ask you to share what lifts you as we look ahead to a new year.
What gives me hope?
What gives me hope?
What gives me hope?
What gives me hope is other people's kindness, science,
the vaccine, beauty and tranquility of nature.
The younger generation.
What gives you hope at this time?
That things will get better.
The amount of empathy that I have seen.
People caring about human connection gives me hope.
What makes me smile, besides Christmas, is that we will persevere.
Smart Canadians out there to help us, including the two sons that I've raised.
What brings a smile to my face is my 5-year-old granddaughter.
My sister Maggie.
My children and my husband Pat.
My caring neighbors.
Time with my family.
Being able to talk and laugh with my colleagues, friends, and family, even if it's just through Zoom.
I love seeing their pets. I love seeing their babies.
One word to describe 2020, probably chaotic.
Pandemonium.
Self-reflection.
Turning point.
Resilience.
Sacrifice.
Quarantine.
Crazy.
Weird.
Are we done? 2020?
I'm ready to ring in 2021.
That was great.
Can we watch it?
Of course we can.
Hi, guys.
Public health officials are warning Americans to avoid New Year's Eve gatherings.
You have multiple patients that are going into cardiac arrest or code blues. Not everybody can respond to those, so they're having to make a choice.
Up next, record deaths and record hospitalizations. How the U.S. is grappling with its worst surge yet. Plus,
My question for the panel is...
I want to ask about...
My question is...
Rosie and the At Issue panel take your political questions. And later, the moment we're all waiting for.
I got the call last night and I was really emotional.
A shot of hope as we ring in the new year. We are back in 2. Welcome back. The United States has spent much of 2020 as the global epicenter of COVID-19, and the forecast for the beginning of 2021 is frankly frightening. Daily new cases in the U.S. grew by nearly 230,000 today. Even more staggering, the death toll from COVID from just the past 24 hours, more than 3,700 people. At that pace, COVID will kill more Americans in the next 5 days than have been taken by the virus in Canada throughout the entire pandemic. And if this keeps up, by February, COVID-19 will claim more American lives than the Second World War. Katie Nicholson shows us a New Year's Eve on the knife's edge.
3, 2, 1, Happy New Year!
The ball will drop in Times Square tonight, but little else will be the same. Soaring COVID numbers have prompted familiar warnings.
It's very important to avoid large gatherings and small gatherings.
In California, little to celebrate, as the state hit more than 25,000 COVID-related deaths.
You have multiple patients that are going into cardiac arrest or code blues. Not everybody can respond to those, so they're having to make a choice. Who do I respond to? Who do I not respond to?
And it could get worse, with confirmation the new, possibly more contagious variant of the coronavirus is now in San Diego.
They said it would take a medical miracle.
Still, today, the president sold a vision of a happier new year ahead.
We've already begun a nationwide vaccination program, and we're sending the vaccine all over the world. The world will benefit, we'll benefit, and everybody's calling to thank me.
Perhaps not everyone. Vaccinations are roughly 18 million behind target. The task of actually delivering the shots left to overburdened states.
We had 100,000 calls in less than 24 hours requesting appointments for vaccination, 30,000 email requests.
Instead of lining up to get into New Year's Eve soirees, Americans are lining up to get vaccinated. The sluggish rollout makes for an easy New Year's resolution for the country's other leaders.
Our goal is to vaccinate 1 million New Yorkers in the month of January 2021. That's a very big goal. That's a very tough goal.
Tough, but in line with President-elect Joe Biden's pledge of more federal support and 100 million vaccinations in his first 100 days in office. And with that, hope for a happier and healthier new year. Katie Nicholson, CBC News, Washington.
In Wisconsin, a medical worker left 500 doses of the Moderna vaccine out on a counter to spoil. At first, the worker said it was an accident. The truth is more shocking.
The individual was suspended and, after multiple interviews over the course of the week, admitted yesterday to intentionally removing the vaccine from refrigeration.
So the case is in the hands of law enforcement. No word yet on motive. Dozens of people received those spoiled doses, which, while not dangerous, likely offer little to no protection against the virus. Jimmy Lai is the highest profile figure to face punishment under Hong Kong's controversial national security law. The media tycoon is charged with colluding with a foreign power. Now he is back in jail after a court ruled that granting him bail was a mistake. To the shouts of supporters, Jimmy Lai was packed today into a police vehicle. For years, Lai has been known for both his influential media empire and his pro-democracy activism. Today's events, likely no surprise to him. I spoke with Lai back in the summer after Hong Kong pushed through the national security law. Is everything you're saying here, sir, actually a violation of this new security law?
Yes.
And that doesn't worry you?
No.
Is there not a chance that you could be spirited away in the middle of the night to a prison in mainland China?
Yes. But what can I do? Just keep quiet?
Lai said Hong Kong's fate this year holds a lesson.
How mistaken we have been, thinking that when China grows richer, we'll be more like us.
He'd hoped that world scrutiny or a united front might keep Beijing in check.
Free Jimmy Lai! Free Jimmy Lai!
But with the pandemic, countries spent 2020 looking inwards. Lai and the Hong Kong he represents may be on their own. Still ahead, after this preposterous year, you had a lot on your minds. At Issue takes on your political questions about the year that was and what's next. And as we go to break, I want to wish our viewers in Newfoundland and Labrador a happy new year. Countdown to 2021 with Rick Mercer is next on CBC Television. But first, one more Canadian bright spot to show you as part of our Take That 2020 series. Tonight, we take you to Moncton, where a pandemic puppy made for an exciting year.
Hi there, my name's Elaine Gray. We're from New Brunswick, and this is Grace. To me, when I look at 2020, of course, this is my bright spot. Grace came into my life in March, the end of March, 1st of April, 2020. And from there, it was full speed ahead. We didn't look back. We spent the days outside and exploring and, being on the river. I fish. I would take her with me. We go on the Jeep and we're checking out the fishing spots and seeing what's going on. And if COVID hadn't happened, I wouldn't have Grace and I wouldn't be able to share her with everybody. I think in the time we're living in this world, that everybody needs a little grace. Everybody needs a little grace.
Hi, At Issue.
My question for the panel is...
And I have two questions for the...
This is my question for At Issue.
I wonder if the panel could talk about...
I want to ask about...
My question is...
It's that time of year as we wrap up 2020. What a year it's been. We did ask you for some of your questions to put to the At Issue panel because there should be some semblance of normalcy in this year. And so this is how we're doing it. Joining me for one last time in 2020, Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. Okay, I'm going to try and whip through this as quickly as I can, you guys. The first question is from Ashith Basu.
Have the Canadian federal provincial government, its leaders, chief medical officers, shown leadership, vision, clarity, good decision-making in handling the COVID pandemic? Did they rely on science or on a populist agenda?
Andrew, you can start on this one. Did they rely on science or a populist agenda?
It's a mixed bag, but I would say mostly they've relied on the science. I think elected officials have had a very difficult balancing act, as they see it anyway, between addressing the pandemic and also trying to keep their economies afloat. I think many people would say that's to some extent a false choice, but that's easy to say when you're not in the office. But by and large, they've stuck to the science, and by and large, we've avoided some of the really crazy things we've seen in the States.
I'll get everyone to do quickly on this one. Althea?
I agree. I think they did the best with the information that they had. I do think they could have been more communicative about what they knew and what they didn't know, but I think there was also part of, in the early outset, they wanted to make sure that we were calm and not panicked.
Yeah.
On the populist agenda, I do think, and Andrew hinted at it, that they've been struggling with things that they want to get done, like reopening schools, but then not basically following the advice that they were given on how to open schools because they felt that that was onerous or too expensive. So in some parts, it's, as Andrew said, a mixed bag.
Yeah, and economic pressures too, or lobbying from certain parts of inside the economy. Chantal?
I wouldn't call reopening school a populist agenda. And yes, some of the things they could have done might have taken too long, but the notion that you can keep people locked up and kids away from school for 9 or 10 months in the name of science only will lead you to a lack of an audience for what you're asking people to do. So I think overall they did the best they could.
Next question is from Liv Carlson.
What is stopping the Prime Minister from invoking the Emergencies Act in regards to COVID-19? After nearly 10 months of this virus and over 10,000 Canadian lives lost, it's clear that many Canadians are failing to follow health regulations. When will the Prime Minister step in to say, enough is enough?
Well, it was a hot topic through the spring, but it seems to have fallen by the wayside. Althea?
He, I believe, will never impose the Emergencies Act. We live in a federation. I think the consequences of imposing that would be disastrous for the Liberal government, frankly. One thing that we can commend the government for doing is working collaboratively with the provinces, or at least trying to work collaboratively with the provinces. And a lot of the big things that Justin Trudeau wants done as Prime Minister involve the provinces, whether it's pharmacare or long-term care, and he does not want to annoy them. And I don't believe that the government even sees a need for the Emergencies Act at this point.
Chantal, yep.
I'm not sure what the expectation would be that the Emergencies Act would suddenly make people listen more to popular premiers in Quebec or BC or other areas of the country just because Justin Trudeau is using the Emergencies Act. I'm not even sure that it would be particularly efficient, but I do note that I have not noticed, maybe I missed it, a single public health officer in any province, leader of the opposition, leader of a third party or premier calling on the federal government to use, or even an opposition party in the House of Commons calling on the government in Ottawa to use the Emergencies Act, and for good reason. There's no magic in that box.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to try and clip through another question. Mary Ellen Purkis, this one will be for you, Andrew. A question about long-term care.
I wonder if the panel could talk about how likely they think it is that we'll see an agreement between the federal and provincial governments instituting standards that ensure quality of care for seniors living in long-term care.
Andrew?
We may see an agreement. The agreement may not contain a whole lot. There'll be a lot of provincial resistance to this. On the other hand, people will want to be looking like they're being cooperative. I could imagine some sort of agreement that didn't really mean a whole lot, but would involve the feds transferring some funds.
Our next question is from Maya Payevich. Here we go.
What lessons have we learned from this year, and how will that help us when dealing with the next pandemic?
Althea, do you want to tackle that one?
It's best to overreact in dealing with a pandemic than to underreact, I would say. Best to be prepared. If you're not prepared, throw everything you can, which is what the government has done. And I think that public opinion polls show that across the country, not just at the federal level, that the premiers are seeing most premiers are seeing a bump at their numbers because of it.
Okay, this one will be, well, we'll see if we can get everybody in. But a question from Dominic Cava about Alberta's handling of the pandemic. This one will be for you, Chantal.
Premier Jason Kenney's poll numbers are dropping due to his handling of the coronavirus pandemic. What should he do to recover, or will his actions hurt his government's re-election chances?
What do you think, Chantal? Jason Kenney has been under some pressure throughout this. He's now put some restrictions in place. What do you think?
Yes, he is the premier who gets the poorest mark from his own voters on his handling of the pandemic. I think it's too early to assess what that does to his election prospects, but I do note that Jason Kenney set aside the pandemic, campaigned on the notion that he had answers that involve taking on Ottawa to solve Alberta's problems. They happen to be much more complex than just Justin Trudeau being the Prime Minister. And I suspect that may drag him down over the long term as much as his handling of the pandemic.
What do you think, Andrew, about Jason Kenney and how he's managed things?
I agree with Chantal. He's been dealt a very poor hand. Whether he's played it terribly well is another question. But not only has I do think that they were too lax in the early going, particularly in their imposition of restrictions in Alberta. But longer term, as Chantal said, that they're facing a existential question in terms of their main resource, their main source of livelihoods. And that's going to be hard for any premier to play. And it's you can blame Ottawa, but even if you had a different government in Ottawa, that's not going to solve some of the fundamental problems facing that industry and facing the province.
I mean, it's so, I mean, when you think about sort of where we were at this time last year after the election, thinking about Western alienation, not to say that it's still not a present issue, but where we are now and what Jason Kenney is trying to deal with now, Althea, just it's sort of mind-boggling how quickly some of that has changed.
Well, I mean, I think the pandemic's changed everybody's priorities. I still think Western separation is an issue. It may be a dormant issue, but it's still an issue. I don't think the pandemic changes that. And I agree with both of what Andrew and Chantal said. I think it's way too early to think that the NDP is only going to sweep into power in Alberta because of Jason Kenney's management of the crisis.
Yeah. Okay. That was a good one. We've got more viewer questions. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, more of those questions, including we're going to get to this one.
What do you think is the likelihood that the Prime Minister will opt to pull the plug on Parliament sooner rather than later?
Oh, well, that's the question everybody wants answered. I'm not sure we have the answers, but we'll do our best right after this short break. Welcome back to another round of At Issue. We're taking your questions for the last panel of this year. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj all joining us from their homes, of course, where everybody is this year. Here's Parmdeep Gill with his question.
I want to ask about Bill C7. Why Parliament is not working together to pass this bill unanimously, which is of great importance to many Canadians.
So as we record this, the government has now received an extension on this bill until February to respond to the Superior Court decision in Quebec. Chantal, I think a lot of people were frustrated that it couldn't get dealt with, but it is a serious issue. Your thoughts on that?
We should possibly say, for those who don't live in the parliamentary bubble, that C7 deals with medically assisted death. I'm not too surprised that it's taking longer. I don't think that this is the kind of matter where you are well served by your parliament by having a unanimous view on the issue, as it is a serious issue that brings a lot of different perspectives together. So bottom line, I am not disturbed by the notion that Parliament is taking the time that it takes to debate an issue of that nature.
Yeah, you pointed out in a previous panel that this is now the third extension Parliament's got. I'm surprised they got another one, but perhaps, Andrew, that does speak to the complex nature of this and the fact that it's going to take some time.
Yeah, I mean, the questioner asked why it wasn't passed unanimously, given it's so important to so many Canadians, and the answer is it's so important to so many Canadians.
That's right.
But there are people of goodwill on both sides of this who have very deep concerns. There are people who want to alleviate the suffering of those nearing the end of life or with intolerable conditions of life. And there are people who are very worried, such as I am, that this is going to normalize suicide and it's going to leave a lot of vulnerable people exposed. So it behooves all of us to take the time and debate it thoroughly and get it right.
Althea.
Well, it wasn't passed unanimously because there is not unanimous agreement between MPs, let alone within political parties, about this bill. And this is the second version of this bill because the court told Parliament that it didn't strike the right balance the first time. And the first time we had this discussion, there were a lot of people, including the current Justice Minister, who felt that the first version of the bill did not go far enough. And so I think it is wise for our parliamentarians to take the time needed.
Okay, lots of questions, obviously, about the timing of the next election. Here's Matthew Enright with this.
There seems to be a general feeling that there will be an election sometime in the new year. With that in mind, what do you think is the likelihood that the Prime Minister will opt to pull the plug on Parliament sooner rather than later?
Okay, all three of you will get a chance to answer this. Don't worry, Chantal.
I don't for a second believe that the Prime Minister will pull the plug on Parliament in the middle of a pandemic. So I think it's off the table for the winter. I also believe that if it comes to that for a late spring election, a budget will come first, that the Liberals will feel confident to campaign on, and that the opposition parties will feel that they can't support.
Andrew, what do you think?
I'll just pause to note that we have a fixed election date law in this country. But it's a little disturbing that we all just kind of pass lightly over that the Prime Minister could just pull the plug, quote unquote. Yes, the legislation has that loophole in it, but the expectation was and should be that when governments pass legislation like that, it has some meaning. That being said, I think it may, to some extent, have some bearing on his decision-making, that he would, for that and other reasons, would prefer to be defeated in Parliament rather than just simply up and go to the Governor-General on his own. And as Chantal said, it may well be that the budget is the occasion for that. But remember the arithmetic of these things. The government only needs the support of one party to stay in power, which means all three of the major opposition parties have to vote together to bring it down. And they rarely see it in their simultaneous interest to do so.
Yeah, they all have to really hate something. Yes, Chantal.
But do remember that two minority governments in this country, New Brunswick and BC, had the premiers call an election, not be defeated, and were rewarded for doing that with a majority government.
Althea.
So I actually think it's possible, after the budget is tabled, for the Prime Minister to walk over to the Rideau Hall and ask the Governor-General to dissolve Parliament and say, listen, when we were elected in 2019, we were facing a very different situation. I want to spend $100 billion more, and I believe I need a mandate from the public to do that. That being said, I think it's going to be hard for the opposition to defeat the government because I feel like the NDP has no incentive to defeat the Liberals. They've never been in a sweeter spot in terms of negotiating tactic. The other thing is, when you look at the electoral map, it's actually kind of hard to see where the Liberals get a majority with the polling numbers that they now have.
Okay, listen, thanks everybody. Thanks for a good year, even though it's been a terrible year. But having you with us has helped, and I'll see you back here in 2021. Here's to a better year soon. Thank you. Now let's go back to Adrienne in Toronto.
You bet, Rosie. Happy New Year. After the break, her love of books led to this realization.
There's not a lot of main characters that have diversity.
What she's now doing to change that.
I'm Jamie Poisson. Join me for CBC's daily news podcast, Front Burner. Every weekday, Front Burner takes you deep into the stories shaping Canada and the world. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. There were some words of encouragement tonight from Prince Harry and Meghan in a New Year's letter. It was published on the website of the couple's nonprofit, Archwell Foundation, a message about compassion and kindness, inviting us to choose courage, healing, and connection. We learned in 2020 that a big part of connecting with the world was through reading. Books can open a whole host of possibilities, especially for kids. But it can be hard to connect if you don't feel seen or represented in those books. One 11-year-old girl is on a mission to change that. Magda Gebrselassie caught up with her in Hamilton before the lockdown took effect.
Flipping through one of her many favorite books, it's hard to tell that Ainara Marinalin wasn't always a fan of reading.
Whenever my dad would get me to read a book, I'd be like, no, thank you. Let me go watch TV instead.
That changed, especially when her dad introduced her to the Percy Jackson books, with their mix of fantasy, adventure, and Greek mythology. But while searching for more books to read, Ainara started to feel left out.
Even in Percy Jackson, there's not a lot of main characters that have diversity.
So she started looking for books with diverse characters, and it soon turned into Ainara's bookshelf on Instagram. Each recommendation, a book with characters who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color.
All these books, they're just normal kids who happen to be of color, being a doctor or dreaming about being a superstar, or just, one of those books about kids trying to solve mystery, So it's just like any book, but it's representation, and it's actually people that look like you.
She reviews the books and interviews the authors and illustrators. Helping Ainara on her quest is her father.
I'm extremely proud of her for identifying a problem and trying to fix it or contribute to fixing it.
And she's about to do even more.
I've got your name badge here.
Thank you. Ainara is now Hamilton Public Library's first junior librarian in residence. BIPOC authors currently make up about 20% of the library's collection. The plan is to have this 11-year-old help increase that.
She's getting some preview reads that we haven't even had access to, so we're looking forward to those titles being published and obviously being highlighted.
And now, like the characters she loves, she's armed and ready for her new mission in the new year. Magda Gebrselassie, CBC News, Hamilton.
Good for her. Next on The National, a healthcare hero got the call he was waiting for.
Today, I actually got my COVID-19 vaccine.
A bit of light leading into the new year, next in our moment. We've heard from many frontline workers throughout this year, but one who is familiar to us is ending this year on a high. Today, Dr. Nahid Dosani got the COVID-19 vaccine. So a pretty good ending to 2020, and his moment today is our moment tonight.
Today, I actually got my COVID-19 vaccine. I got the call last night and I was really emotional. Actually, I had some feelings of happiness, of course, that we're beginning our journey towards the end of this pandemic. But on the other hand, I was emotional because I was sad with all the grief, kind of scared of needles. So I was definitely worried about that. And I took a deep breath and then the jab happened and it wasn't so bad after all. I think getting the COVID vaccine on New Year's Eve, it encapsulates a year that has really been all about COVID-19. But more importantly, it means that I'm able to be protected in a bid to allow me to then care for people who are dealing with COVID-19. As we head into 2021, my hope is that we can continue as a society to collectively work together as a community to take on and tackle the COVID-19 pandemic.
And listen, Dr. Dosani, thank you for all you've done for us, to all the nurses, the doctors, the orderlies, the PSWs, the postal workers, grocery workers, bus drivers, anyone who's been forced to be out there. Thank you all for this year. Let's hope for a better one. That is a national for December 31st. Feel free to take a hike 2020. For our viewers on CBC Television, Countdown to 2021 with Rick Mercer is coming up next. Happy New Year and good night. Good evening. I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Andrew is away. Finally, it is New Year.